Oh, actually, I'm in Boston.
Uh-huh.
And let's see, here we are. Okay, we're now on the air. And my guest is Roger Simon. Roger is a well-known Hollywood screenwriter, author of nonfiction and fiction novels. He is the CEO emeritus of Pajamas Media, which has made quite a wave in terms of commentary, particularly on the political side and on the conservative side often. Roger, thanks for joining me this afternoon.
Very pleased to do so.
Now, Roger, you have a new. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about your latest novel. I'm interested in giving me a thumbnail on that, and also what is it like to write a fictional piece of work versus a nonfiction book and an article?
Well, I'll answer the first question, the second question first, and that is it's harder. I mean, you have to come up with plot and character and a lot of other things that you don't have to do when you write an article or a nonfiction book. But all writing is hard, let's face it. There's a line from Dorothy Parker that I quote in the novel that's it's lousy to write, but great to have written.
Ah,
That sort of encapsulates the whole thing.
now,
Now,
now, do you keep a discipline as a writer? Do you write every day, and do you?
yeah, it's an illness for me. I mean, if I don't write something every day, I feel like I haven't really had my day. I try to
Right.
exercise every day, but I'm sure I write every day. The Goat, my new novel, is the first of 13 books that I self-published because I felt that the time had come to experiment with that and because it seems to be the wave of the future, especially with fiction. I think
Mhm.
it's going to be the wave of the future. But um, it's a kind of like your listeners must be pretty intelligent. So if I say it's a Faust story, they won't say Faust. What's that? Which my wife always said I shouldn't say.
Right.
Um, but it's a story of a guy my age who's played tennis all his life, which I have. He's a semi-retired screenwriter, and he's finally, after decades, made it to the finals of the senior division of his club tournament, right? And
Hmm.
in the first game, his back goes out something fierce. So
Uh-huh.
he's taken to the hospital. The doctor says, "We got to operate. This is awful." But there's a woman from India or Nepal, somewhere in there, sweeping up in the corner. And she says, "Do not do operation. Always makes worse. Go see my cousin Gombo in the valley. He fix up." Well, the guy's a Western guy, so he goes, he has the operation anyway. And the woman, it turns out, was 100% correct. It's a disaster. He can hardly move. He feels like his life is over. He's on the brink of suicide. When he finally gets himself to drive out, barely able to drive anymore, out
Yeah.
to San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles to a mini mall where he meets a cousin Gombo, who turns out to be an Ayurvedic doctor, kind of a shaman from Nepal, who starts to give him Nepal Himalayan herbs and teas, and he starts to get younger and younger.
Hmm.
And soon, and I'm not going to spoil the story because it's kind of a great adventure and it's funny. And he ends up as a 22-year-old again battling Nadal at the French Open and Federer at Wimbledon and
Wow.
having a beautiful young wife and all these wonderful things. But he has to pay for it because it's a Faust story.
A Faustian bargain, as
Yes,
from
Faust,
Goethe.
as you said.
Yeah.
So that is the basis of the goat, and the goat, of course, stands not for the Billy Goat Gruff, but
Hmm.
for GOAT that people hear about nowadays in sports, as in the
Oh,
greatest of all time.
right, right. They say that about Belichick.
Right.
There you go. And also, it kind of reminds me a little bit of a story I'm covering about transhumanism over at MIT
Yes.
and its connections with Jeffrey Epstein, which is a whole different story. But
Yes.
if you go to the MIT website and look up transhumanism, that you find this man who just was forced to resign under a cloud who had headed up the Media Lab.
Yeah, I read about it. Yes,
read about it, and it openly.
There.
Yeah.
So mine is a little more upbeat at first than anything to do with Epstein or
Understood.
or transhumanism at MIT, but
it's a fictionalized maybe version of it because transhumanism is supposed to lead to eternal life on Earth.
Exactly.
And these guys are serious about this. I mean, they're doing some, cutting edge research. They think they can evolve the human species into something that reminds me of the Ubermensch, but that's another story.
I mean, it's
yes?
not really another story. It's a good point. And the point of what the novel tells you, I'd rather people read it, but I will say that it's a cautionary tale. And I think there should be a cautionary tale about the transhumanism as well. I mean,
well, you could be the new today's Mary Shelley, right? Which is Frankenstein. She was talking about her ultra progressive husband and father and mother, and trying to warn the world about this idea of the creating life and controlling life out of nothing, out of death. And she was kind of, I think, partially why that novel has had the endurance that it's had. But I want to talk a little bit about Hollywood. You have your roots in Hollywood going back many, many decades, and you know a lot of the major players going back to some of the big actors like Warren Beatty and others, and just some of the producers. You've been a screenwriter in some of the most significant movies that Hollywood has produced in the past many decades. What is going on there, first of all, in terms of this extremely liberal, anti-Trump thing that I see? I get tweets from Rob Reiner. Seems like he's lost his mind. I mean, he's, he won't even, this horrible, malcreant, the way he describes Trump. It's almost like he's describing someone else that maybe he knows. I don't know. Maybe it's a case of transference.
Or himself.
I didn't want to say that, but yes.
Right. You're not the first to ask me about this, and it's somewhat mysterious because it's so crazy. On the other hand, here's one way of looking at it. And what I observed in Hollywood over the years, and of course it got worse and worse, is that they were all split personalities. They have very many of them have what was referred to in those movies as a mini-me. Remember that?
Yes, sure.
Yep. So they've got a mini-me over here, right? The mini-me says, power of the people, I'm for every progressive cause that ever lived and breathed. Meanwhile, the real me is calling his agent and saying, 15 million, that's half what I got last time. What are they doing?
Right. I mean, there's some disconnect between the two.
And there is, in Hollywood, I have observed over the years, almost a graph that you could draw that the people who are the most publicly liberal or progressive with that mini-me are the biggest SOBs in private to the people they work with and to the life they live.
Well, I mean, I've observed this in my more ordinary life amongst people who are usually the most outwardly liberal and left. It's a whole different ballgame in their life, which brings me to an issue. I don't know if you knew him, and I know it's a bit of an unpleasant subject, but the whole scandal around Harvey Weinstein and some of the people involved. Just one of the quick before you talk about him. It really, irks me some of the hypocrisy that's gone on around that. I mean, just the pounding on the chest about sexual harassment and rights of women. Meryl Streep being the worst offender after going out with that speech right after President Trump's inauguration, with oh my God, this man is terrible with women and meanwhile, she knew this was before Harvey Weinstein was revealed, and she was very close with him and spoke about him as being God in a speech she delivered at an award ceremony. So, I mean, what is going on with that?
Yeah, it's unspeakable hypocrisy. There's no question about it. And there's a level of self-hypnosis in all of this. they've hypnotized themselves into believing they're not hypocrites, which is a rather extraordinary feat. But it's probably something that actors can do well, because that's what they do for a living. They impersonate reality.
They're
And
pretending to be someone else. Yeah.
I mean, the example of Weinstein is really interesting, because I never worked with him, but I met him. But everybody knew somewhat of what was going on. They didn't know the whole thing, but they knew. I mean, sure, Meryl Streep did. I mean, she doesn't live on another planet, and so they all know this. And that kind of behavior that Weinstein may be one of the worst ever, but that kind of casting couch behavior is as old as Hollywood itself. I mean,
Sure.
it goes back to the silent era. And young women and actresses who came to Hollywood for work bloody well knew it. I mean, they would have been morons not to have known it. So, in other words, on a certain level, they signed on to this. And yet, all of a sudden, they're going, "Oh my God!"
Right, exactly. I mean, this is, and that's coming out also now in this new book about Weinstein, that a lot of the women involved here, they were very much either a part of it themselves, or they were enablers of this behavior. And it became just part of the whole firmament of the way people conducted themselves. And as you say, all the way back, I think that a lot of the men are homosexuals and secretly as such. And there's a lot of pedophilia going on in Hollywood as well. Can you talk about that?
Not personally.
No, I know. I'm not saying.
There's a lot of all kinds of sexual perversion going on in Hollywood. There's no question about it. And I'm sort of a square guy compared to them, despite the fact that I lived a sort of a '60s life in my early days. I was married, had children, did things like that. So
yeah, I understand.
I'm not, I'm not an insider when it comes to pedophilia thing.
Oh, no, and I'm not even mildly suggesting it. I'm just asking if you know about it, because you're very close in proximity to this scene.
Yeah.
And I mean, look, I'm going to just ask bluntly. I get the feel. I mean, I don't know this firsthand, obviously, because I'm very far removed from it, but I've heard people talk about this who have some credible claims that a lot of the people who started out as child actors were sexually abused as children, and that and I'm sorry to mention a name here, but the name Steven Spielberg has come up regarding this, and I'm not saying anything that hasn't been publicly spoken about by some of the people who were in his movies, and that it's part of this culture that children are kind of initiated in, as child actors, and then they become adults, and then they are part of it. Am I onto something with that? I mean, Leonardo DiCaprio's name is
about that extreme stuff. I really don't, because I wasn't close to it, and I don't know about it. So it's like, were a lot of people very creepy? Yeah, but the private life of Steven Spielberg is unknown to me completely. I met Steven Spielberg, but many, many years ago, and I don't know anything about his private life, period.
Okay. I'm only mentioning it because as part of a broader question about the culture of Hollywood, and very much why they are so stridently left and so anti-Trump, which to me it screams that there's something else going on. Another one who's extremely anti-Trump is Robert De Niro. I mean, I wonder what's going on underneath that hood.
Oh,
I mean, I'm not saying.
They are absolutely extremely, and on a level that can be described as sick. There's no question about that.
Right.
So how this relates to their private lives, I'm not exactly sure, because I don't know. And unlike a lot of people, I don't like to say when I don't know. On the other hand, anything's possible, as they say, if you know what I mean. I know.
That's right. All right. Yeah. And also this, in a way, in a broader sense, it goes to a certain culture that has, as you say, a split personality. There's the public image, and there's a whole different story going on privately, maybe not even necessarily with individuals, but as groups that results in somewhat of a network that's not savory. Let's just put it that way.
If you want to talk about a groupthink, in Hollywood is really a capital of groupthink. I mean, people have to go along and get along. And it's sort of like the American university today, where the same thing is true. I mean,
Yes, it is.
the right has given up entertainment and education, and that's going to be a disaster to our country going forward unless we change it.
No, I think the left holds the high ground in probably most of our cultural institutions now, whether it be Hollywood, academia, the performing arts. They just and what happens if you're in Hollywood and you go there as an actor or as an employee, and you don't kowtow? I mean, what if you are conservative?
Well, there are two strikes against you. There's always one strike against you, but now there are two. Is of course most important vis-a-vis writers, because they're the ones who are telling the stories. Actors are just people moving their mouths. And it's the discrimination against writers is such that very, very few conservative writers in Hollywood are left as such. I left myself. I live in Nashville now. I can't live. But that situation is extreme. And part of the fault for the situation, of course, is the conservative money people who have not put money in the arts.
That's a very good point.
It's really a strong point. They only put money. They'll invest in dedicating a philharmonic and have their name on the lobby wall. But Beethoven doesn't need help at this point.
Right. Maybe it's because they're smart with money and they don't want to see their products blackballed. If they invest making a movie.
No, they're stupid. They're wrong. No, that's not it. What the problem is, they don't really invest in it. They're suspicious of the arts, and they don't want to do the obvious thing, which is to build alternative institutions, to build methods of distribution and stuff. That could be done. It costs money, of course, but it doesn't cost that much money. They put money into think tanks, which are almost always meaningless, and other adventures that don't really have any effect on the culture the way film or television might. But they don't do it, and it's a kind of foolishness and snobbery. But it's all sitting there, and they could make a lot of money doing it, because when there are movies like that, they're quite successful because the audience wants them. Movies like The Blind Side or Lone Survivor or whatever.
Right. I mean, Dinesh D'Souza financed a documentary which was pretty successful, but he had to fight tooth and nail to get that in the theaters, and there was all this resistance and this backlash against him. But I think he did pretty well with the last one.
Yeah, look, I've been involved with Dinesh, and I know him well, and I praise him. But what he does is the obvious. What I'm talking about is real art, filmmaking, and not propaganda filmmaking. I mean, he is a propaganda filmmaker, a good one. He's on our side, all the rest. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about those things move the culture less than the dramatic art that sweeps people in.
Right.
Much harder to do, but that's what I try to do in The Goat. I would have done The Goat as a movie years ago, but I knew the odds were stacked against me so much that I had to do it as a book first. Sometimes that's a good idea anyway, because books, you can get more depth to start with and then reduce it a little bit, because movie scripts are, by their very nature, I wouldn't say more shallow, but they're more telegrammatic, more simplified than a novel would be.
Right. And I think that the left infiltrated Hollywood a long time ago. I mean, Billy Munzenberg, the communist playwright who was a chief propagandist for Stalin, talked about this and the need for that. He realized that communism could be advanced much quicker and much more thoroughly through the culture by means of the particularly movies. Absolutely. And also books, and that they basically. I mean, I remember reading an interview with Dalton Trumbo, one of the Hollywood 10, was asked, "Well, why were you involved with communism?" He goes, "It wasn't because I believed in it. It was because I wanted to have a screenwriting. I wanted to have a job. That's what you did back then in the 1930s to
Not
get
only
ahead in Hollywood.
when I was starting out, I did that too.
Sure. Oh
I
yeah.
was
No,
in
that's
those days, and I recognized very quickly that the more leftist the studio executives were like uh, rich jerks who wanted to think
yeah.
they were leftists. Okay, so if you said you knew the Black Panthers, you get a job. It was that simple, and that's stupid. When you
Yeah,
think,
I'm sure. And you worked your way up the rat line, and they gradually weeded out those who, didn't make it either by attrition or just slowly kind of squeezing them out, just like they've done on the college campus.
but
You know,
movies were much better back then. They were in the 70s and 80s and 60s. The movies were a lot better than they are now. And now they're just mostly junk. So but in those days, people were interested in movies. I don't think the public is that interested in movies anymore.
they have a lot of competition now,
Too
right? I
many
mean,
alternatives.
you've got Netflix, and there's the cable, and there's of course the internet, and just there's a lot of competition for eyeballs. So the Hollywood almost is like, it's like what's going on with the record companies.
Yeah,
They're no longer this big monopolistic player where you have a room full of maybe about a half a dozen big movie moguls who decide what the American people are going to see and not see. Now there is the ability of an independent to come up and find a niche, have an audience. Maybe it's not as big, but when you get enough of that nibbling away, it's going to have an effect. So they're losing money now. I
yeah.
mean, isn't that ultimately what speaks to them? Money. Wouldn't that
Money,
might that
money,
not change the culture
yeah,
of
it's not,
Hollywood?
it's not all bad. It's not all bad. The idea that writers and musicians and people like that can be more entrepreneurial and go at things by themselves is not bad. I mean, I'm having fun promoting the goat and doing it myself
Right.
after having been, published by many very famous publishers like Simon and Schuster and Random House, etc. But in this is I'm the publisher, and I get to say whether I want an ad. I get to say everything, and I like that. I'm
No,
not
I mean, I
I'm not
self-publish books.
particularly, but I'm an adult and I like to be in control of my own destiny. So there's a positive aspect to it.
No, there is. I mean, I self-publish books and I promote them myself and I write them the way I want to write them. And Amazon does a pretty good job of giving me a page for my books. How do you go about publishing your books as a self-published author?
Well, this is just my first shot at it, so you probably know more than I do. But I first of all I wrote the book. I gave drafts to people I thought were fairly intelligent, so that I could get some feedback before I made it public. And I adjusted accordingly. And then I put it up on Amazon, and it's being turned into an audio book and all the rest of that. And it's
Excellent.
selling okay. I
Right.
mean, I had one advantage because of PJ Media.
And you have a name.
A lot of
You're a
my
known figure.
So that's an
Oh yeah.
advantage over an anonymous person just coming in.
That's right. But at least one has the opportunity of publishing their books, sending out press releases that are relevant to the topic, but also relate to things people want to talk about in the news and getting interviewed. And there's ways to go about it. So I think that the opportunities in a way have expanded for your average writer. Doing this YouTube channel is an opportunity, even though YouTube, I know they're coming in with censorship. I've heard this. Nevertheless, it's still an opportunity to put together a channel and have your views heard and seen by people.
Exactly. I mean, so if you pay your money, you make a choice. I mean, I've had interesting experiences with big time publishers. Sometimes they've gotten behind my books, and sometimes they've just ignored them completely. Some of the reasons for that were political, some weren't.
Right.
And now it's up to me, and I prefer it to be up to me. I mean, I'm not 25 anymore, and I've, I've had a lot of experiences, and I've written a lot of books, and I'll give it my best shot. If it doesn't work, I'm not going to die. I might even
Yeah.
write another book. But this one, I think, is actually the best book I've ever written, which
Wonderful.
is especially in the world of fiction, so that I have the confidence that if I tell people, like I tell your audience, go and read this, you'll have a lot of fun. I mean it. And if I could give a money back guarantee, I would, but I can't because
No. You have the chops
it's
to say that.
anyway.
Yeah, I mean, you've been around, you know what you're doing in that field, and you've got an incredible story. Your biography is fascinating. And I hope that what you're doing is a harbinger for the way business is going to be conducted in the future, in that, a person can develop a media empire just by sitting there with their laptop and a webcam and a mic, or just, sitting there with their Microsoft Word document and maybe joining a couple of archival organizations to get source material and doing their own research on a topic that they're fascinated by and then publishing it as a book. There are so many things you could do right now with very little money. In some cases, a lot of it is free. And then putting these things together, that I think that that's the future, I hope, for our economy and for American citizenry. So,
It is.
and you're like you're really an avatar for that in
Yeah.
what you're doing right now.
I mean, I feel like I'm a late bloomer in the self-publishing world, although I was an early adopter in the blog world because when we formed Pajamas Media, that was really one of the first companies of its nature anywhere.
Oh yeah, no, it's cutting edge. I mean,
Yeah.
I love the story that you were responding to Dan Rather's snide remark about guys sitting around in their pajamas and how dare they, compete with this august reportage.
The guy who said that was pretty naive because the people who were attacking him were actually very experienced lawyers. In my case, an Academy Award nominated screenwriter. I bet my house this guy could never write a screenplay that would be nominated for an Academy Award.
But not to mention the fact that he was fired for plagiarism.
So they were like naive in their own way. But
Absolutely.
where's Dan Rather today? Well, he's still trying to put together a reputation on Twitter, but every time he opens his mouth, he gets destroyed.
Yeah. Well, there you have it. So, Roger Simon, let my viewers and listeners know exactly where they can get your book, where they can get more information about you, or any websites you'd like to talk about.
Well, basically, you get my book on Amazon. That's the simplest way, or at Ingram if you want the hardback. But you can also get the hardback at Amazon, and it'll be whisked to you very quickly. And information about me, well, I have an author page there, Author Central, but also, I'm on PJ Media all the time. And I've also been lately writing for the Epic Times, a newspaper that I recommend to a lot of people.
Great. All right, Roger Simon, listen, thanks so much for joining me this afternoon. It's been a pleasure.
And my pleasure, too.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.